Representation is an interesting word. In the legal world, it is an advocate, someone who will zealously defend their client. I've always loved how that was worded. Zealous. From the Latin, zelus. Ardor, emulation, noble passion, devotion. Elsewhere it means something different. It is seeing a depiction of something in art. A painting could be a representation of a scene, perhaps one that actually occurred, or one used as reference. There's a lot of talk about representation in the media, specifically of marginalized communities. LGBTQIA+ representation, Black, Indigenous, and people of color representation, neuroatypical representation. Specifically, trying to have representation that is true to the experiences of those groups, their cultures, their lives, and not caricatures or tired cliches. There is some progress, but even in minority circles, there are exceptions to the rule. I touched on this in previous videos, but I never really addressed it directly. But it is something I feel on a very personal level. Mixed cultural representation. In Star Trek, you have a couple of mixed characters, but I've always found it a little odd. Let's take the ones from the main show. We have Spock, half human, half Vulcan. B'Elanna Torres, half Klingon, half human. Tora Ziyal, half Cardassian, half Bajoran. While interplanetary, interspecies breeding is pretty out there, scientifically, there's some story logic that allows this to happen inside of the universe. But take a moment. Is there a culturally mixed human in Star Trek? Any of the shows? Clearly none of the main characters. So in this universe, it is more likely that a human breed with another species than it is to, say, a French person to have a child with a Pakistani person. What made me think of this again was the announcement of the new Dragonlance series. Hard to think about it without thinking of Tanis half-elven, originally a child of a brutal sexual assault, which was later retconned to be forbidden love. I'm not sure if I buy that that was the original plan, as Tanis' mother apparently died of the shame and shock of the assault, but after childbirth. It's murky. As a side note, rape and fetish stories that mixed people have to face all the time get truly exhausting. We are either the offspring of some terrible tragedy or some odd, exotic fetishization. As if those are the only two ways that you can overcome the disgust at mixing blood. In Dungeons & Dragons, we have half-elves, half-orcs. There were other half-races in the past, but they've not been renewed in the new system. Like the Mull from Dark Sun, half-dwarf, half-human. But much like other things that we may talk about in later videos, race, ethnicity, and culture are not a binary situation. I'm at least 3 ethnicities. Maybe even more if you track it back enough. If we accept that in D&D races can interbreed, that they are the same species, then you could be a mix of a ton of different ancestries or cultures. What does D&D say about people like that if it were to happen? Mongrel men. I love this hobby. I really do. You can say what you want about how this is talking about mixing different fantasy races, and it isn't a commentary on mixed ethnicity people in the real world. Okay. I get what you're saying. I've been called mongrel before. The term is probably the most hurtful epithet that has been flung my way regarding my ancestry. Mongrel is a term for a dog whose breeding is so mixed you can't tell what type or breed it is. Imagine asking a dog, "Where are you from?" I mentioned in my previous video about the Dragonlance lawsuit that there were instances of racism and bigotry in recent work from Wizards of the Coast, like Curse of Strahd. And let's be clear, the portrayal of the Vistani was terribly offensive. But to their credit, Wizards issued an errata and corrected the module, reissuing it as Curse of Strahd, revamped. I didn't buy it. Mongrel folk are still in there. Yeah, they made changes to the original Mongrel man in 5th edition to make him more like Dr. Moreau experiments, but the name remains. Imagine, if you would, any racial slur, the N-word, G-word, C-word, whatever, take your pick. Add the word folk to the end of that word. Create a monstrous race of disfigured, ugly humanoids. Would that be okay? Of course not. But the mistreatment of people of mixed descent is easy. We have no group, we have no term, we have nothing in common with each other, but shared humanity and a feeling of alienation. Of being the other, of being a fraction, a half, a third, a fourth, 1/16th, and when the fraction gets too low, even governments don't recognize our link to our own past. I've been told I'm not Korean enough, I'm not Hispanic enough, I've been called Twinkie and Coconut, I'm too dark to be Korean, and my eyes are too slanted to be Hispanic. The thing about being mixed race is you don't just get stuff from people outside your ethnic group. You get it from other marginalized people as well because they don't see you as one of them. So you get stuff like this.
Why is it always the half-white, half-Asians who have the worst takes? Truly biracial people who are half-white sometimes just need to shut up. Maybe I'm being too harsh, but
We are not considered Asian enough to have an opinion on Asian issues in Dungeons & Dragons. Mind you, this was set in a space specifically for the inclusivity of POCs in an RPG group by a supposed advocate for minority inclusion. And you might imagine that this bigot was shouted down by the voices of inclusivity. But no one said a word. And their silence was deafening. You see, it's okay to exclude mixed people. They're only fractionally marginalized. I felt included. A few years ago, I saw a term for mixed Asians that they started using for themselves when discussing their lives and experiences. It was Hapa. I never really used the term. For some reason, it just didn't speak to me. I learned it later in life. But it provided comfort to a subgroup that I'm a part of, being mixed East Asian. But even then, I saw this recently.
Non-Hawaiians cannot use Hapa because Hapa Haole is for people with Hawaiian ancestry, meaning Kanaka Oiwi only. And to use Hapa without our ancestry means it is appropriation.
Now let me be clear. That sentiment is not close to universal among Hapa Hawaiians or Hawaiians in general. But it is their word for a specific subgroup of a subgroup, and I don't blame them for wanting only mixed Hawaiians to use it. But it shows the lack of connection that people of mixed ethnicity have with one another. Why would I feel connected to a Spanish-Korean person if I am half Hawaiian, half black? None of our cultures intersect, and that's the issue. I only know 2 other people of my specific mixed group, and they are my brothers. So while other groups have unifying connections from shared cultural experiences to bind their marginalized groups together, there is little connecting people of mixed descent. So how do we handle this in something like Dungeons and Dragons? Well, here, there's a little light at the end of the tunnel. This book, Ancestry and Culture by Eugene Marshall and these fine folks, provide rules for D&D to create your character in a manner that you wish. If you want to be a gnome, human, elf, dwarf, you can, and there are mechanics for how to handle it. As with any rules or supplements, you can use it or not use it as you wish. And this is not a commercial for that product. Mr. Marshall and his team have no idea that I'm doing this, don't know about this video. I've never really talked about it before. But it does alleviate a lot of the pain that I've experienced as a lifelong D&D fan. I love this game, flaws and all. I'm frustrated that a third party had to make this product, but I am grateful that it exists. It not only has rules for mixed ancestry, but mixed culture, acknowledging the separation of the two. And there are rules for multiples of each beyond just 2. It lays the framework to work with alternative ancestries and cultures that aren't in the player's handbook. Now, this is a great step, but it isn't enough. Wizards should be doing more, and it isn't the responsibility of a third party to fix all of its ills. Mr. Marshall can't change what's in Curse of Strahd. But also, change has to come from within. Some of the prejudices are so ingrained in us, even from within our own families, that we don't always recognize it. Being mixed doesn't make me immune to bigoted ideas. No one is immune. We just need to recognize the issues from within ourselves. And from what I see, there are 3 different types of responses. First, denial. Getting defensive or angry or dismissing the very notion that it exists in the first place. Second is righteousness. Feeling that you are clearly not racist because you're marginalized, even to the point of spewing hate towards others in righteous ignorance. And third, growth. Let's talk to each other and learn. Err on the side of kindness. If I say something that is racially insensitive to gender, ableist, or anything else, come to me. Person to person. Let me know how to correct it. As for me, I need to stop referring to myself as half or part. It promotes the idea that I am not a full person. I am simply a sum of an equation. I am Korean. I am Spanish. I'm Puerto Rican. I'm an American. I'm a person, and I don't need to cast a spell to change myself into one of those things. I am all of those things. For the duration. Until I die.